He wakes up every morning and he tells himself he doesn't really need the answers. He is who he is. He's always going to be who he is. But I think him knowing now the history of his family, you're learning about yourself, a crazy feeling to like wake up one morning and realize you know nothing about yourself. I am Casey Carr. I live in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and my dad is Piero.
I think your dad and my grandmother are cousins. I think that is where, because your dad had you older, so I think that's where it is. And the Creole side is our connection. Still sometimes wonder if like we're doing the right thing by talking about it.
Our story is so unique because for the most part, people are really raised in their culture and really raised in like understanding who they are and where they come from.
We're both from the Piero side. We met for the first time in Natchitoches like 2 weeks ago, and I got to meet your dad and your sister Darla and your kids and your husband. And so your dad is actually the first Piero that I met and I talked to him on the phone, and then he introduced me to like Chris Smith, who introduced me to his sister, your Aunt Audrey, and it's just been like this crazy thing. So we all met. Where has your dad been as you've been kind of like digging through all this stuff?
Super interested. He's the one that told me about your channel.
Can't get over you.
They're just all like,
You have so much of their characteristics in your facial,
I hope
your
that's
speech,
good. I hope that's
everything.
good.
Dad was one of 8 brothers, and then Aunt Audrey was the ninth. She was the only girl. Like nobody can say anything about the love he has for his family. He is just so I feel like it brings him a sense of honor to learn these things. You know what I'm saying? And then with you having him being able to see it and touch it and feel it, I feel like it gives him a sense of pride in his family. Very excited about it. He loves it. Yeah, it's it's a really cool side of him because it's like getting to watch him. I'm getting it.
Yeah, like he's on. He didn't go looking for this, right? He didn't,
Right.
and I don't use this term lightly. Like generational trauma. Something happened with our immediate, I say immediate, our Piero family, this family,
Right.
where no one seems to really know who they are. There's a weird thing with this, and I think without knowing that it existed, I just thought my family was weird. Weird. Like, when did you start asking the questions of even, I guess, even recognizing that there's a question to ask about our family? Like, when do you feel like you realized that?
Uh, so the only person I've ever really been comfortable enough to have those conversations with is my dad. And not until recently has he brought up the fact that like he's been kind of rough housed by police before to be shown ID. It wasn't until recently he told me that, like within talking about your videos. And I feel like for the longest he probably made up reasons why, or I don't really know. Maybe he knew all along and just hid it.
He must have been born like 1940s or early 1950s.
1939 was his, yeah,
1939. Okay, so
yeah.
my Grammy was 1936, so like, they're like the exact same age, which I guess makes sense. Like, okay, and you have to think like so my side, we were growing up in New York at that point, like everyone that moved to New York, but your dad's still in the South.
Mhm.
In the growing up as a person of color in the 40s and 50s down there, and like your experience, like you like anticipate certain things, so you make other decisions or whatever, want to hurt people in this. And I think I don't know for your dad, but at least for my Grammy, I don't even think there was an opportunity to hurt her because she was not gonna talk about it really. Like it just is not coming up. It's not coming up until she was, really at the end of her life. And then she started to share some more.
Small child, I was told we were indigenous, that we were Native American. And that's just, and it was just a guess, I think. It was trying to fill in the blanks for me. I knew I was a little different from my friends because my friends didn't get asked, what are you? You know what I'm saying? There was never that question to them. And it was, and then when I would get that question, I would always just say, well, my dad says that he's Native American. And they'd be like, well, what tribe? And I'm like, I have no idea. Like, so a hard thing to say because it doesn't take away from the indigenous people that were stripped from their culture and their heritage. You know what I'm saying? So it was always a weird line to try and walk.
It's
to
weird
be
because you're like trying to respect all these people, but at the same time recognizing like our family is part of this group and different people in African American community, Creole, Native American community, and Chinese, like where all of these ancestors came from, had different experiences. And some grew up with culture. It doesn't mean they had an easy time, but they grew up with it. And some are us in 2023 trying to do this.
right.
Like, and I don't know, I still feel kind of uncomfortable saying anything but white, and I think the thing that has blown my mind, I'm sure you've had this too, but I didn't know people didn't see me that way.
When we went to Natchitoches, I would see Creole people walking down the street, and they would catch me out of the corner of my eye, and I'd be like, it would immediately make me think of an uncle or like a picture or like it was just it was a beautiful thing to experience because I don't know, I guess growing up not really knowing, you kind of look for people that look like you. And my sisters who were adopted had the same experience. They would look for people that look like them just to kind of try and understand who they were. And it was so funny because when they found us, I was like, "Well, we don't have the answers either." So, like, this was really before we started digging in and knowing and following the tree. And it was like, we're all learning this together. And it's really amazing. It's
It's amazing. I guess sometimes I keep like hoping that I will have a sense of being like just I mean, I would say just between you and me. Like obviously I'm gonna share our conversation, but between you and me, I don't think I will ever have the feeling I'm hoping to get because I think the feeling I want is something you have to grow up in. It's just
yeah.
I don't think I'm gonna have it, and I don't know what that. I think my kids can have it, but I don't know if I can. I'm not rejecting anything. I just
Right. There's no rejection. It's that it's being very mindful that our experiences growing up are very different than people who grew up in these cultures. There was a reason my dad and Lola were tried to be white passing. You know what I'm saying? And you look at them now and you're like, you're evidently not. But at the time, whatever, it was means of survival. Like to have the best possible outcome for their future. You can't be mad at them. You can't blame them. You can't, now that we're able to learn about it, I feel like it's such a beautiful, like, circle back. It's like coming home.
I do. I didn't put on my waterproof mascara. I literally I feel so you feel like just talking to you brings me so much emotion because we are doing it on either side of this like Piero line. And like we met in the middle and like we're here.
A lot of the trauma was being removed from their family. And now in 2023, we can kind of make sense of that. You know what I'm saying? The fact that they all had to leave their families and their culture and their safety nets to go find better lives elsewhere is traumatic because you don't have that sense of community, that sense of family from people that look like you and talk like you and act like you and share stories about, there's a sense of community. There's a reason why culture plays such a big part of who we are, especially in South Louisiana. Like my mom's family is pure Cajun, pure French. And I grew up with that side of the family. It was that sense of belonging and family that I never had with dad's family.
Mm.
And I always took it as, dad was much older when I was born, or his brothers all moved. But I think a lot of it is the trauma of having to leave your safety net, leave your family, and create a new identity.
You get raised with certain things and they just trickle down and I don't really know why it's that way, but this is just how our family does stuff, or this is how we behave around certain subjects, or you just accept that as your family norm. And I feel like as you get older and like you're saying, you look around at other families and you realize, wow, this isn't a weird issue for most families, or most families are very proud of who they are and they'll have a flag in the yard with the American flag of whatever country their family immigrated from or whatever. To be able to sit down with your dad or your grandma and really have no information is like kind of and they're not immigrants from Russia or something. It's like it's not like we don't know and it's the motherland. It's like
Right,
it's here and we
right,
don't know anything. I'm like, you're in Louisiana.
right. That's what I'm saying. I grew up not far. Like I knew my whole life my dad was from Monroe, or like I knew that his dad lived in Campty and Natchitoches. I knew that that's how and my dad left and came to Baton Rouge at 15. But at 35, I'm piecing together the reasons why he left, and I'm sure he knew at the time, but he couldn't really address, it's just shoved so deep inside just with like, because he didn't have answers either. Like he didn't know. He would saying like he wakes up every morning and he tells himself he doesn't really need the answers. You know what I'm saying? He is who he is. He's always going to be who he is. But I think him knowing now, getting to see the history of his family and with all the how much he loves his family, it's beautiful to see him like come into that, and you know what I'm saying, just have that for him.
This reminds me of my Grammy Marion. So it's Lola's daughter. There's this sense of it. This is a very independent person. They're not going to sit and wallow in how they may have been discriminated against or mistreated or like that's just not who they are. But because it's like this overcorrection of like it was so bad, whatever it was, that they don't want to talk about it. That's like they're like everything's so good, and the baby with the bathwater, I guess, because now it almost feels like there's no foundation for the family somehow. Like,
Right. Well,
yeah, we're happy and we love each other, but I don't know. Like, you have to know you. I don't know. It's
and community and culture and traditions and knowing one another, and you know what I'm saying, and the fact that just, I mean, to think that like we could have missed out the fact that our daughters are identical, you know what I'm saying, to know that like in the United States somewhere there's another version of my kid, you know what I'm saying, like
so basically Casey has a daughter. It's like the same age as one of my daughters, so Ruby. And I saw a picture of her daughter, Sarah, and I was like, okay, that looks like my daughter. And it's
identical.
so crazy, like skin color, like it just everything is just, it really messed me up. And you realize, like, first of all, the Piero genes are like so strong, like they
Yeah.
will not be, like you can't get rid of them. But I think it kind of just goes to show, it's like even when you don't know who you are, like you still look like who you are. Like we're still this family, even without the knowledge. But for you, Casey, how do you feel like, how is this like personally impacting you? Like, okay, we're grown adults now, we're married, we have kids, and like we know who we are, we have our hobbies, but like, how does it feel to kind of be like going to the beginning of this?
Always hate to try and claim something that I'm not, like that makes me feel uncomfortable, is to try and, because I can't represent that culture well. And so I feel like that too is a lot of the reason why it's hard for me to claim anything but white, because like I don't feel like I can represent different cultures because I wasn't aware of it until 35. You know what I'm saying? Like I,
Mm.
yeah, so it's not that it's nice having answers. It's nice having, like when my dad is Creole and Chinese. If they take the time to ask me, I'm going to take the time to tell you because you've just asked a really big question. And now we're both going to take a long time and feel uncomfortable for a little bit. You know what I mean? Like whole history, how far back do you want to go? And like, I
Right.
don't ever really take offense to that question. I don't know. I like sharing it, but I'm going to share all of it. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? Because that was lost to them. They didn't, it's not until I was an adult that I ever saw a picture of my dad as a child. His sense of belonging came from family stories. And like we said, all of them were made up. Well, some of them were made up, maybe none of them, nobody really knew. Like he
Yeah.
waited until I was like in my 20s to share that my great grandfather was from, or great great grandfather was from China. And like, that's, like, I feel like that's a piece of information I'd want to share, like, hey, by the way, and not that he ever wanted to hide it or meant to hide it. I just think that they were taught to not ask questions or not point those things out. Just kind of was like, oh, by the way, like,
Well, it's things that people were either told to be ashamed of before, or you weren't allowed to be, like all these things. Like it's kind of turned on a dime now, where it's it's almost like it's kind of safe to come out to like talk about this stuff. And so like we're talking about this now, and it's like, well, why didn't they just talk about it? But that's not the world that they grew up in, and that's not the world that they were even taught. Even if they didn't feel like they were ever in danger, it's like you're taught not to say anything. And like that's really kind of the thing that was passed down to us. I feel like is just, don't talk
yeah,
about this stuff you talk about.
I feel like we owe a big thanks to, like, the people who do the work and really fight for representation, in the media or, in books or in politics or, across the board. I feel like our generation, we started to see different types of families on TV. Whereas when he was growing up, that was not the case. And now that we're in 2023, it's a bit better. But that took a lot of work and it took a lot of time, and thankful for it.
Think also it required like kind of a payment from these families. I think the payment was that there's a lot of people like us who don't know their history.
Right.
And that's just it's my whole life. I thought I was walking around like totally white. And then you realize the reason that you have these issues is actually because you're coming from these communities of color. And I think that's a comment that I've saw a lot of times on videos where people will say, well, what you're having is actually a really Black experience or a really Creole experience. Like this is actually part of that experience. And then it was almost weirdly nice to be like, there's people understand what's happening. It's recognized. It's a recognized thing. It's not just like, why is my family so weird?
It gives answers to so many things. You know what I mean? I keep coming back to feeling like I'm very lucky that I get to find these things out. I wasn't raised around other Creole people to know like what part of my life. I was raised in a very white space. And the only reason like I knew I was any different is because I got the question, what are you?
What are you?
I feel like there's so much about the Creole like story and the Creole experience that I still don't know about that I'm excited to learn and listen and see if I resonate with. And you know what I'm saying? Like just because I want to be respectful and honor that part of me. You know what I'm saying? And that culture, even if it's not, it is a part of me. It is a part of me.
The whole time I've known my husband, known my family, he knew he stayed with me at my grandma's house, my grandma Marion's house. Like he knows him. And so he's watched this whole thing unfold of just the turmoil. He's always like, it's really not a big deal. Like you guys are obviously X, Y, and Z. I'm like, it's a huge deal. Because I want my family to tell me who I am. And I feel like having other people confirming like, oh yeah, I know, it's like, that's nice. But I just really want someone to like put their hand on your shoulder and be like, this is who you are. I'm telling you as you're
Right.
whatever.
But I think that could really be just a multicultural experience. I think that might be the closest we can get because, there's a study that's out that says by I think it's like the year 2050, the majority of the population is going to be more than one race. It'll be multiracial. Maybe because of where our family comes from and because of the history of Natchitoches and that it's so old, we were kind of like a microcosm of what America is going to be because it was all these cultures blended in one area. Self-identify as white, but also understand that I am multiracial. You know what I'm saying? It's like maybe once I learn more and I can honor those parts of myself better, I'll be more comfortable saying multiracial. But I feel like I'm still in the very learning stages. You know what I'm saying? Like, and that's a weird thing to say about self-identity and who you are, but it's very much a learning thing. You want to make sure I do it right. It's breaking the cycle of filling in the gaps or guessing or so and so said but so and so didn't say. Like it's being able to have that history, that tangible knowledge of this is where we came from, this is who we are.